people working on this was Thomas Peele. Another person who was working on it was Reynolds, who is here tonight with Thomas, and we'll be talking to him about the new book. They'll be in conversation, and then we'll welcome questions from you. Please help me welcome Thomas Peele and Martin Reynolds.
From the holy city of Mecca to Detroit, arriving on July 4th and announcing that he had come to find what he called the lost tribe of Shabazz in the wilderness of North America and lead its members to salvation through their true religion, Islam. Farad's messenger was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who had led the Nation of Islam for 41 years, demanding complete segregation of the so-called Negroes from the rest of American society. With images of Farad and Elijah behind him and stoic young men in dark suits and bow ties standing rigidly at his side, they railed against technology, which the black Muslims defined the science of deception that whites use to deceive and suppress people of other races. He referred to people of color collectively as Asiatics, a group that included Native Americans, Africans, and Asians. He spewed anti-Semitism and claimed the Holocaust paled compared to the treatment of African slaves and their descendants in the Americas. Christianity, he said, was nonsense, a spook religion. Like Elijah Muhammad before him, they often babbled about a mad scientist named Big-Headed Yakub, who created the white devils, Caucasians and Jews, through a series of grafting experiments 6,600 years earlier, or how a mile-wide mother plane orbited the earth, forever preparing to annihilate the devils in an apocalypse that would restore Asiatics to their rightful place as humankind's masters. The devils were snakes of the grafted type, or skunks, or cavies, short for cavemen. He was also unambiguous about his willingness to employ violence to enforce his will or retaliate against those who crossed him, positions he articulated weekly on television. We don't turn the other cheek. You turn a fire hose on my mother, I will kill you till I die. If you think I'm going to let you put a hose on my mother, put dogs on my mother, so I can sit in a toilet next to you, you're out of your cotton-picking mind, he said in a 2002 sermon. You're not just ordinary people. Black is dominant. The Caucasian is scientist for evil. They had never really moved beyond the rigid black Muslim dogma of the early 1960s, and much of what he preached was rhetoric long dismissed as ignorant fables from another age. Although he wasn't part of the Nation of Islam, he was among the last true believers of its original racist message. It was itself a backlash to centuries of white oppression.
Thank you, Chauncey. Thanks. One thing that I didn't expect when picking this book up was that amount of historical context, and I noticed that you spend several chapters about the conditions in Detroit before the time of the Nation of Islam and its formation between World War I and the Depression, as well as the national conditions of blacks at the time. How did the racism of that period feed the formation of Islam and enable W.D. Farr to create this, as you say, fictive religion?
Sure. We all know a little bit, I'm sure, about the Great Migration and Isabel Wilkinson's fantastic book, The Warmth of Other Suns. Detroit and Oakland, there are pretty good parallels between migrants who went to Detroit around the time of the First World War and migrants who came to Oakland to work in the shipyards after Roosevelt's desegregation order in 1942. And in both instances, when the war ended and white workers came home and wanted their factory jobs back, officials both in Detroit and in Oakland kind of looked around and said, when are these folks going back down south? Don't they know that we're kind of finished now? We don't need them anymore. And in both instances, they were very surprised to discover that no one wanted to go back. That led to, in Detroit, a pretty quick ghettoization of African American factory workers. And Detroit did what Oakland would do after the Second World War, which is send some people from city government down south to recruit some cops. So people would come up because the white power structure in Detroit thought the only way that they could control the ghetto was to have some southern cops who knew how to do that. So it immediately became a oppressive situation. I found some language in a newspaper from Detroit Free Press from about 1927 that I quote in the book, I'm sorry, Detroit News, about the ghettoization, and they actually used the language, the final solution. Wow. Okay, I didn't think anybody kind of quite thought of that phrase yet, but they literally had a final solution in Detroit to what to do with the Southern African Americans who would really come for these oversold factory jobs. $5 a day, they were told, and they didn't end up getting $5 a day jobs.
We've learned a little bit about the man who called himself Dr. Day, because he certainly didn't have the academic credentials to hold that title. Now we want to delve a little more into Chauncey. And you delved into Chauncey's speech impediment that he had and how he later overcame it sort of out of nowhere. There's no therapy and no treatment. And I think that passage in the book was very enlightening to who Chauncey became. Can you read a little bit of that?
Sure. This will be short. This is chapter 11. You skipped one, Chauncey Bailey would stutter, looking back at the house of a newspaper subscriber that his mother, Bridget, had just sped by. By the time he got the words out, Bridget would be halfway down the block. She'd stop and back up hurriedly, her left hand over the wheel, the right draped over the seat, her torso twisted. "Hurry up," she'd say sternly, and Chauncey would jump out and wing the Hayward Daily Review onto her porch. Bridget drove Chauncey on his route most afternoons. She was so busy rushing between her own jobs as a beautician and a practical nurse that she didn't have time to wait for him to do it by bicycle. Chauncey's younger half-brother, Mark Cooley, was often in the back seat folding the papers. Chauncey dreaded missing a house or making any kind of mistake that would cause a subscriber to complain. Even as a youngster, he seemed to know that some people, especially white people, would use any excuse to express dissatisfaction about a black person.